It was supposed to be my victory morning, the kind where everything finally clicks. The months of long nights, endless spreadsheets, and quiet sacrifices finally paying off. As VP of Finance, I had led our company through a grueling $180 million merger. Every number, every clause, every hidden liability had my fingerprints on it. But the air that day felt strange. Still. Too still. Like the calm that settles before a storm, no one sees coming. The calendar reminder popped up on my screen. Board call, final merger approval, 10 a.m. I adjusted my blazer, brushed a stray strand of hair from my face, and clicked Join Meeting. The familiar faces appeared one by one. Directors, legal advisors, auditors. And then him, David Hartwell, our CEO. His camera came on last. That smile. Controlled, polished, empty. "Morning, everyone," he said smoothly, eyes flicking across the screens. "Let's make this quick." Something about his tone made my stomach tighten. This was the man who had once praised my strategic brilliance in front of the entire board. The man who had promised me a promotion once the merger closed. I presented the numbers with calm precision, outlining the cash flow integrations and projected earnings. But as I spoke, David didn't look at me. Not once. He was scrolling through his phone, jaw set. Then came the pause. The kind of silence that cuts the air. David cleared his throat. "Before we finalize the signatures, there's been a change." I froze. My mouse hovered midair. He continued. "Effective immediately, the board has decided to make some leadership adjustments. We're restructuring finance leadership moving forward." A faint static buzz filled my headset. I blinked, unsure if I heard right. I'm sorry, David, what kind of adjustments?" He leaned closer to his camera, face unreadable. "You're being relieved of your position, Claire. Effective today." My breath caught. My ears rang. And then, before I could even form a sentence, his voice sliced through the call again. Colder this time. "We appreciate your contributions, but the board agrees it's time for new direction. HR will follow up after the call." Every square on that screen turned to stone. No one spoke. No one looked at me. It was a live call, with over 30 executives. And I had just been fired on it. My mouth went dry, my fingers numb. I could see my own reflection in the tiny camera window, shock painted across my face. David smiled faintly. "Let's continue. The merger must go on." The world blurred. I didn't remember clicking leave meeting. I only remember the sound, the dull click that ended my career, at least on paper. But as I sat there, alone in my office, a strange calm washed over me. Beneath the sting of humiliation, something darker stirred. Not defeat, but clarity, because David had just made the one mistake you never make in corporate warfare. He underestimated the woman who built, the numbers he was standing on. And I knew something he didn't, something that would turn his $180 million triumph into his downfall. The hours after that call felt unreal, like watching my own life from behind glass. My office, once a place of control and purpose, felt smaller now. The framed deal certificates on the wall mocked me, each one a reminder of how much I had built. And how easily it was ripped away. I didn't cry, not yet. The anger hadn't found its way to the surface. It was just silence, the kind that hums after an explosion. Within minutes, HR sent the email. Cold, templated, and almost polite. "Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Access will be revoked by end of day. Thank you for your service." Like I had been a waiter, not the architect of the company's largest financial deal. By noon, my keycard stopped working. The building security nodded awkwardly as I packed my things. No one met my eyes. Not the analysts I mentored. Not the directors who had called me the backbone of this merger. They all looked away, afraid to be seen offering sympathy. But as I walked out of that glass tower, a strange, steady thought followed me. They didn't fire me because I failed. They fired me because I knew too much. I went home and replayed the call in my head, every word, every glance. Something had shifted in those last few days before the meeting. The CFO had gone silent. The legal counsel had canceled our last prep call without explanation. Then I remembered the file. The one labeled Project Helios, revised contract, draft, the version I wasn't supposed to see but found. Accidentally in the shared M&A folder late one night, I had noticed subtle but critical changes, a few lines buried in the appendix, terms that redirected post-merger profits to a private shell entity, one registered in the Cayman Islands, and whose name was tied to that entity, David Hartwell. The merger wasn't just business. It was a cover. He was using it to siphon millions under the radar, dressed up as consulting fees. And I had proof. But I hadn't said a word. I wanted to confirm it quietly before going to the board. Yet somehow he found out I knew, and made sure I was erased before I could act. That realization hit me harder than the firing itself. The humiliation, the betrayal, the manipulation, it was all part of his plan. Still, David had made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed that firing me would make the evidence disappear. What he didn't know was that I had already made a personal backup, encrypted and time-stamped, on my home drive. And inside it was every document, every transfer, every whisper of the corruption buried in that deal. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, the glow of the screen painting my face in cold light. My reflection stared back at me, calm, unblinking, and silent. If they wanted me gone, fine. I was gone, but not forgotten. They had destroyed my career in public. Now it was my turn to return the favor, in a way they'd never see coming. The first few days after my firing were a blur of silence and insomnia. My phone barely buzzed, except for a few hesitant messages, polite condolences disguised as curiosity. Sorry to hear what happened. You deserved better. The kind of sympathy that comes when people are too afraid to stand beside you. But my mind wasn't on pity. It was locked on that merger, on every hidden trail David thought he'd buried. I spent hours combing through my backup files, cross-referencing contract drafts, wire instructions, and internal memos. The deeper I dug, the darker it got. The revised agreement wasn't just unethical, and it was illegal. David had built an intricate maze of offshore accounts under subsidiary names that only showed up when you followed the digital breadcrumbs buried in audit metadata. It was genius and evil, and I was the only one who could unravel it. One night, I scrolled through a folder titled Helios Amendments. Buried in it were scanned copies of internal emails between David and an external consulting firm, one that didn't officially exist. They spoke in code, referring to Phase 2 allocations and retention incentives post-signature. But I knew corporate language. Phase 2 meant post-merger payouts, and retention incentives meant siphoned bonuses for those complicit. That's when I realized this wasn't just David. At least 2 board members were involved. The thought made my stomach twist. These were people I'd trusted, people who'd toasted me at company galas and called me family. Now I saw what family meant in corporate terms, loyalty until exposure. Still, the question haunted me. How do you fight an empire when you're alone and unemployed? I reached out quietly to someone I trusted. Ethan Wells, our former compliance officer. He'd left the company 6 months earlier after clashing with David over ethical concerns. I sent him a message. Need to talk. It's about Helios. He called within an hour. His voice was tight, cautious. Claire, if this is about what I think it is, you need to be careful. They have eyes everywhere. I told him what I'd found. The shell companies, the amended clauses, the Cayman accounts. Silence hung on the line for a long time before he finally said, "You're sitting on a grenade." "I know," I whispered. "And I'm done hiding it." Ethan agreed to meet. We spent hours dissecting every document, matching each clause to financial movements. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed, and it was devastating. By the time dawn crept through my curtains, I realized how massive this was. David wasn't just covering his tracks. He was using the merger to divert $42 million directly into those offshore holdings, under the guise of consulting fees. The audit trails were disguised, but not invisible. Ethan looked up from his screen, his eyes hard. "If this leaks, it'll blow the company apart." "That's the point," I said quietly. But as we planned our next step, I noticed something chilling. My company email, supposedly deactivated, showed new login attempts. My LinkedIn was flooded with fake profiles visiting my page. And late that night, a black sedan idled across the street from my apartment. Engine running, lights off. I pulled the curtain shut. They weren't just protecting a deal. They were protecting their survival, and I had just become their biggest threat. The morning after my meeting with Ethan, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing nonstop. Notifications, emails, missed calls, all from numbers I didn't recognize. Something felt wrong before I even opened them. Then I saw it, a headline flashing across my feed. Former VP under investigation for breach of confidential data in a 180 Millers merger. My breath caught. My hands trembled. My name plastered everywhere. The article was vague but poisonous, filled with sources claiming I had stolen proprietary documents after being terminated. They painted me as a bitter executive seeking revenge. David had moved faster than I expected. Within hours, my LinkedIn vanished, deactivated by request. My professional email accounts were locked. Recruiters I'd been in touch with stopped replying. My entire reputation, years of work, was reduced to a smear headline. I called Ethan, voice shaking. "They're framing me," I saw, he said grimly. "They're spinning the narrative before you can act. Classic misdirection." I felt the betrayal hit deeper than anger. It was humiliation turned inside out. They hadn't just fired me. They were erasing me. Later that day, I got a call from a private number. David's voice. Calm. Cold. "You should have stayed quiet, Claire," he said. "You took confidential files. That's corporate theft. I could have security at your door by morning." My stomach turned. "You're bluffing." He chuckled softly. "Am I? Be smart. Delete whatever you think you have. Walk away. You'll land somewhere else, eventually." And then, like a blade twisting, he added, "You were good at what you did. Too good. That's why you became a liability." The call ended, leaving me staring at my reflection in the dark window. For the first time in years, I felt powerless. But only for a moment, because beneath the fear, something sharper was forming. Resolve. If they wanted war, I'd give them one. That night, Ethan and I met again, this time in a quiet diner off the highway, somewhere no one from the city would think to look. He'd printed everything: hard copies, encrypted drives, bank screenshots, legal memos. But even as he spread the evidence across the table, his eyes were heavy. "Claire, they're tightening the circle. I have a friend in compliance who says they're using your login credentials to alter audit trails. They're making it look like you tampered with financial data before the merger." I felt sick. "They're building the case." "Yes," he said. "By the time the SEC steps in, you'll look like the scapegoat." I leaned back, cold realization hitting hard. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a full-scale cover-up, and I was the sacrificial offering. That night, as I drove home, rain streaking across the windshield, I knew there was no saving my name quietly. David had made sure of that. But there was still one truth he couldn't bury. The original documents. The ones that proved every transfer, every clause, every lie, were signed with his own digital credentials. He could rewrite the story, but he couldn't erase his own signature. When I reached home, my apartment door was slightly ajar. My chest tightened. I stepped inside slowly. Nothing looked stolen, but everything had been touched. My drawers open. My laptop gone. They'd broken in. I sat down on the floor, trembling. My mind screamed to panic, but instead I laughed. Soft, bitter, steady. Because what they didn't know was that my encrypted backup had already been uploaded to an offsite cloud drive, under a pseudonym, hidden behind layers of decoy files. They could take my laptop, my job, my reputation. but they couldn't take my truth. And now, they'd given me something even more powerful than evidence. They'd given me motive. I looked at the city lights flickering through my window and whispered to myself, "You fired me on a live call, David. Now I'll end you on a public stage." The betrayal was complete, and the revenge had just begun. They thought breaking into my apartment and stealing my laptop would sever the thread. It did the opposite. It forced me to move faster, cleaner, smarter. Revenge, I decided, would not be a tantrum. It would be a strategy, quiet, legal, and devastating in the light of day. First rule, don't give them anything they can use. I hired a whistleblower attorney through a contact Ethan trusted, someone who'd handled SEC cases and knew how to lock down evidence and protect identities. We weren't improvising, we were building a legal fortress. Every document I planned to release would be verified, time-stamped, and presented through channels that couldn't be spun away by a PR team. Second rule, make the trail undeniable. David could spin words and scrub internal logs, but he could not erase his own digital signatures, the wire confirmations, and the third-party consultant invoices that matched transfers. I had copies of bank screenshots and email headers, metadata the company would struggle to alter without creating an even more obvious pattern of after-the-fact tampering. Ethan and I got a forensic accountant friend to extract the metadata, create a clean chain of custody, and produce a report that would survive scrutiny. Third rule, pick the right audience. You don't shout at the wind. You bring the hurricane where it hurts. I compiled a media package not for tabloids, but for one financial investigative reporter I'd watched expose corrupt deals before. Her work had toppled executives. She also had connections at the SEC and a reputation for accuracy, the kind of credibility that makes regulators act rather than posture. I wrote a concise, fact-driven brief, included the forensic report, and arranged a secure, anonymous handoff through the attorney. Fourth rule, use leverage they couldn't ignore. Public pressure alone would not move a board already complicit, but shareholders and underwriters would. If the underwriters smelled corruption, they could freeze funds instantly. If large institutional investors saw the forensic report and legal counsel's memo, they would demand emergency board meetings. That domino would be unstoppable. So I tied the evidence to a shareholder alert. The package would be delivered simultaneously to the investigative reporter, to a small but influential investor group, and to a regulatory whistleblower portal, all within a narrow, coordinated window. Fifth rule, create a timing mechanism. David loved spectacle. He planned to unveil the merger to investors at a public press event, a platform I knew he valued. So we timed the leak for the morning of the merger announcement. Not a conspiracy, a surgical strike. The journalist would run the story hours before the press conference. The SEC and investor groups would already be asking questions. David would walk onto the stage with microphones and cameras, expecting applause. Instead, he'd be handed subpoenas and hostile questions about offshore transfers. Sixth rule, protect myself and those who helped me. Ethan, the forensic accountant, and the attorney needed distance. The attorney filed whistleblower submissions under protective statutes, shielding their identities. I used encrypted accounts and burner phones to coordinate. I accepted that I was a target, but I refused to be the only casualty. Seventh rule, anticipate the counterattack. They would go after my credibility. They had already started. So we built a narrative centered on documents and independent verification, not on my motives. The forensic report focused on signatures, timestamps, wire trails, and third-party confirmations. We prepared a short legal memo that explained how each consulting fee mapped to transfers into an offshore entity controlled by David. No rhetoric, no innuendo, just facts. Eighth rule, make it public and procedural at once. The plan was not merely to embarrass, it was to force process. Audits, regulatory reviews, and criminal inquiries that couldn't be swept under the rug. The goal was not only to expose David, but to trigger institutional review that would unpick the $180 million deal and make reversal inevitable. I slept less in those days than I had during any financial close, but I slept with a purpose. Every call, every meeting, every encrypted upload was another stroke toward the reveal. The humiliation of the live firing transformed into a steady, cold focus. I would turn their arrogance into legal consequences and public disgrace. I would make their triumph an exhibit in their own indictment. If this worked, the board would have no choice but to distance themselves from David, publicly. If it failed, I would be exposed farther and faster than before. I knew the risks. I also knew their arrogance. They thought they could burn someone who knew where the bodies were buried and walk away. The plan was set. The players were in place. Now it was only a matter of timing, accuracy, and nerve. When the day came, I would not be in the room. I would be the shadow that pulled the curtain. And when the lights hit David on stage, the brightness meant he would be seen by everyone, for everything he had done. I sat in my car 3 blocks from the conference hall, the engine off, watching the city wake through the haze of early light. The sky was a cold, pale gray, the kind of morning that felt like the world was holding its breath. My fingers rested against the steering wheel, still, calm. After everything, the humiliation, the betrayal, the sleepless nights, there was no more trembling. Just focus. The press conference was scheduled for 9. At 9:10, the storm would break. I opened my laptop, connected to the secure channel, and watched as the countdown hit 0. Ethan's final message blinked across the screen. Files verified. Story scheduled. Go signal confirmed. My pulse steadied. The plan we'd stitched together with whispers, fear, and strategy was no longer theory. It was motion. Across me, the city, the ballroom of the Hamilton Plaza glowed with golden light. The backdrop read, Hartwell and King, Strategic Growth Beyond Boundaries. Rows of investors, reporters, and executives filled the seats. Cameras rolled. Microphones glimmered beneath the stage lights. It was supposed to be David's crowning moment, the unveiling of his empire. And that was exactly why it was the perfect stage for his fall. At 8:57 a.m., I sent the last encrypted trigger. The files released simultaneously to 3 targets: the journalist, the SEC, and a private group of institutional investors with enough influence to demand board intervention. The report was clean. No emotion, no accusations. Just data, signatures, and transfers. A quiet avalanche. By 9:05, the news started to ripple. At first, it was small, a single notification lighting up on my phone from a financial outlet. Breaking. Allegations of hidden offshore transfers tied to Hartwell and King merger. Then came the next. SEC confirms review of whistleblower report. Within minutes, the story spread across every platform, snowballing faster than I imagined possible. And at 9:10, the exact moment David stepped up to the podium, the storm hit full force. Through the live feed on my screen, I watched him bask under the lights, shoulders squared, smile sharp. This merger represents a new era of innovation and global expansion, he declared, his voice smooth and rehearsed. Our leadership has worked tirelessly to ensure transparency and success. He stopped. The first reporter stood up. Mr. Hartwell, she said clearly, can you comment on reports this morning about undisclosed consulting payments routed through offshore entities linked to you and 2 board members? The room shifted. Murmurs. Heads turned. Cameras zoomed in. David blinked, confused, or pretending to be. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you're referring to. Another reporter interrupted. The SEC just confirmed it's reviewing financial documents submitted by a whistleblower. They claim these payments were embedded in the Helios merger. He froze. For the first time, that perfect smile faltered. The feed cut briefly to the investors section. People were already looking at their phones, whispering, some standing. The CFO, once his closest ally, leaned forward and muttered something, her expression pale. David tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. These are baseless accusations, fabricated by a disgruntled former employee who... The journalist interrupted again. Are you referring to your former VP of Finance, Ms. Claire Reynolds? The documents we've seen show your personal authorization codes on every transfer. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The color drained from his face. It was happening, in real time. I could almost feel the weight shift in that room through the screen. The power he'd hoarded for years, through fear, manipulation, lies, was collapsing. And this time, there was no one left to defend him. Security murmured into earpieces. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted overlapping questions. Will you resign? Did the board know? Is it true the merger was illegal? David's jaw tightened. He muttered something to his assistant, then turned, walking off stage as the lights dimmed and chaos erupted. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Across my laptop screen, new headlines appeared like falling dominoes. Hartwell press conference cut short amid fraud allegations. Board members under fire. Following whistleblower revelation. 180 million deal on hold pending SEC review. Each one hit like thunder. Within an hour, the company's stock plummeted 12%. By afternoon, the board announced an emergency meeting. By nightfall, regulators had issued formal subpoenas. David's empire, the one he built on deceit and arrogance, was unraveling in front of the world, one headline at a time. And I didn't need to say a single word. I closed my laptop, leaning back in the seat as the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds. For months I'd lived in fear, of what they could take, of what they could destroy. But now, watching the light spread across the city, I realized something. They hadn't taken anything. They had freed me. For the first time since that humiliating call, I smiled. Not out of triumph, but out of peace. The kind that comes when truth finally has a voice louder than power. When the lights dimmed in the conference hall and the broadcast cut to commercials, I sat in my car and listened to the sound of my heartbeat. Calm, measured, final. It was over. The empire that had once towered over everyone had crumbled under the weight of its own greed. The following morning, the headlines were everywhere. CEO faces investigation after live merger scandal. 180 Manners deal under review, after financial misconduct exposed on air. Every outlet repeated the same clip, his frozen face, the silent room. My voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. The internet devoured it. Within hours, the company's stock plummeted, board members scrambled, and my phone filled with messages I didn't care to read. I didn't want fame. I wanted balance. I wanted truth to stand on its own legs again. When the federal auditors finally reached out, they asked if I could share documentation. I smiled. Everything was already neatly compiled, encrypted, and time-stamped. Months of data, financial irregularities, and communications between the CEO and the external vendor. I sent it all. Within a week, they froze his assets and suspended trading on the pending deal. The empire he built on deceit wasn't just shaken, it was dismantled. The board called me in again. This time it wasn't an ambush. It was an apology. The interim chair, an older woman who had always kept her distance from the CEO's games, extended her hand across the table. You did what no one else had the courage to do, she said quietly. You saved the company from imploding under him. I didn't feel victorious. Not yet. Justice, real justice, isn't loud. It's silent. It lingers in the air like the quiet after a storm, where everything feels too still, too fragile. Weeks later, they reinstated me, not as a subordinate, but as acting CFO while investigations continued. The same office that once felt like a cage now felt like closure. I walked through it slowly, running my hand along the glass desk, remembering every conversation, every whispered threat, every moment I swallowed my anger. He tried to destroy my name, my work, my dignity. And in the end, it was his own pride that destroyed him. The last email I received from him came days before his arrest. It was just one sentence. You planned this all along, didn't you? I never replied. Some answers don't need to be written. They're lived. As I stood by the window overlooking the city that once made me feel small, I realized something simple. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, in boardrooms and signatures and numbers no one else bothered to look at. And when it's done right, it doesn't just end a career, it rewrites the story. Months later, the fallout was complete. David Hartwell had been removed as CEO, his assets frozen, and the $180 million merger voided. Several board members resigned under scrutiny. The company survived, but only because truth finally had a voice louder than arrogance. I walked into the office that morning, the city lights spilling across the polished floors, and felt a calm I hadn't known since the day I was fired. It wasn't joy. It wasn't revenge in the petty sense. It was the quiet satisfaction of seeing fairness restored, of knowing that meticulous work, patience, and courage could outmatch corruption, deceit, and greed. I had been humiliated on a live call, betrayed by colleagues I trusted, and targeted by a CEO who thought he was untouchable. But I turned every setback into leverage, every lie into evidence, and in the end, justice wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It was inevitable. The lesson was clear. In the corporate world, power can be temporary, but evidence and integrity are permanent. The truth doesn't always come quietly. Sometimes it waits, silent in the shadows until the moment is right. And when it strikes, it leaves no room for escape. Sitting at my desk, looking out at the skyline, I knew one thing for certain. I had survived. I had exposed corruption at the highest level, reclaimed my career, and proved that even the most meticulously built empire of lies can collapse under its own weight. This is Karma Unfolded, where every secret finds its reckoning. Don't forget to subscribe.